Welcome to the S.O.A.P Bible reading videos from Oak Tree Community Church in South Bend, Indiana. We are working through the book of 2 Chronicles right now, and we've made our way. This is week 6. Yeah, this is week 6, and we're in chapters 20 through 24, and we've come up to a situation here.
So we were talking about beforehand, and we've been consistently going through the Kings, and we've been going through chapter by chapter, but it doesn't seem right to do it this week.
Well, first of all, there's a ton of little detail
Yeah.
that if we tried, like you said, if we tried to get into it, we'd have to do all of it.
Yeah, right.
And you're going to read it anyway.
Yeah,
so
and it's great. And we're not
no
saying don't read it.
Right. Oh yeah,
all.
definitely.
We just thought we might take a little different approach this week.
Yeah, I use the term soap opera.
Yep.
That if we were watching this on TV or in a movie, we get the visuals, we get the whole thing. But that's how it reads. It's, who's going to marry who and who's going to overthrow who. And, I don't like this guy, he's a villain. And
I used Game of Thrones because it was almost like the Game of Thrones series, which was on cable.
Yeah.
And then we also were trying to use like the British monarchy.
Yeah.
Which I thought was kind of cool because, in real life, we kind of have this in the British monarchy, that there's been things over the years, but in our lifetime, it's been only stable.
Yeah.
One queen on the throne for 60 years.
We read and he reigned for 8 years.
Yeah.
Queen Elizabeth is amateur.
Yeah, exactly. But we also see there that reign is coming to an end, and we see the plans in the future. Now we're not privy to any of those, so we just kind of see some things, but we kind of see how this drama does unfold.
Yeah.
Just in our life today.
Yeah. You've got people in Great Britain who want one king. You got people who want another king,
right.
And when she dies, what's going to happen?
Right.
Now, technically, the British monarchy is mostly formal and ceremonial,
right?
But it's still real.
Yeah. Right.
And they hold many Brits hold on to it very, very closely and tightly as part of their heritage.
Right. Well, we're following it over here.
Presidents and yeah.
And like you said, okay, we understand the British monarchy, maybe one of the best political systems that we understand, but this kind of drama is happening all over the world, all the time.
Yeah. And as we were talking about it, we're like, wow, if this were on the news today, nobody would care.
Yeah,
if this were happening on the news today, it's like, look at all that's going on. Everybody would be just going on with their lives, and
right. And we don't want to be flippant about it because people are dying, and these are real events that happened. That I think one of the huge ones. I think last week, 500,000 men died.
Right at the beginning of this week's, when God takes over When God takes over the battle.
Right.
Yeah.
500,000 men die. And we read it, wow, that's a lot, and we move on.
It's only a couple of verses.
Right. Well, what about that impact? It was not only the men and the bodies and what happens to the land where they were, but also most of these men had families.
Yeah. And
now the main earning source is gone. And what happens to the families for generations, actually. Right?
Yeah. And it disturbs or upsets, again, the entire Middle East. And, in our day, we're used to the Middle East being a hot zone. This just happens in the Middle East. Well, but there's a reason it happens in the Middle East. And that's because Israel's there.
Right.
And we can't forget that God placed Israel at the crossroads of 3 continents intentionally.
Right.
And so it's a hot zone, and it's a very demonic belief or a demonic satanic doctrine of anti-Semitism, constantly trying to wipe out Israel.
Yeah, we've seen that for 3,000 years.
We've seen, from the very beginning. Right? So, as we read this week, and this is all the time, but as we read, it takes us 3 minutes to read, a handful of verses. that took days or weeks or months or years.
Right.
We blow through 4 chapters in a week, and we've just went through 40 years of Israel and Arab history here.
Right.
Right? So slow down, actually see what's going on, see God behind it. There's some great pieces in here that we want to point out about God's faithfulness.
Right.
But also, how people act.
Right.
The good and the bad.
And I think too is the realization, as we go through, there's a bunch of names and they're really close to one another. But if you do take the time and trace them back, it's usually somebody's mother or grandmother or grandfather that you have read in the previous week going on here. We were talking, there is at least one name that's not in here.
Yeah,
that we would expect to be in here, and that's Jezebel. Right?
Jezebel is the queen of the northern kingdom, the wife of King Ahab, and in First Kings she gets a ton of face time because she's so wicked.
Right.
In fact, her name shows up again in Revelation, in one of the churches that was doing some. In one of the letters to the churches, doing some really wicked things that they were allowing in their church.
Yeah.
And Jesus, in his letter, said, "You're following the path of Jezebel."
Yeah. I can remember when I was young, Jezebel, people would call other people that. I haven't heard it lately, but
it's
but
a pretty
still,
bad. It's a bad
thousands
insult.
of years
It's
later.
a bad name.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that as we're talking about God's perspective, what God cares to focus on, her name does not show up once in the Chronicles.
Yeah, in that, it seems incredibly intentional.
Yeah. Now, to be fair, we don't want to go too far down that because Elijah who shows up a lot in Kings and is a good guy.
Right.
You would think he'd be all over the place.
Prophet Elijah. Right.
He shows up only once.
In this week, right?
Yeah.
I think it's this week.
It is. Yeah. So.
In a letter, he's not even. He just writes it in.
He literally mailed it in. He phoned it in, and so Jezebel's not mentioned at all. God hates her. Well, Elijah's mentioned once. Okay, well maybe we.
All right. So what I do think we need to do is we started the story last week with Jehoshaphat, and he led for 35 years.
Yeah, king of Judah.
Yeah, king of Judah reigned for 35 years, and we ended with a battle that didn't quite happen last week.
Got right up to the point.
Yeah, it got right up to the point where there was going to be a war. Jehoshaphat was worried, literally went to the nation. The nation of Israel fasted. Now, that doesn't mean every person did, but as a nation, they fasted, and they asked God for help. And God said, "You don't have to fight this war. I will."
Yeah.
So we gotta at least finish that story.
Yeah. So how did he do it? How did he fight this war for them?
Yeah. And the answer is, we don't know.
Well, it seems like overnight.
Well, and it was, right? But the big thing is trust in the Lord and you'll be safe.
Yeah.
Right. So, in the middle of the night, the battle happened, but it happened against the enemy.
The enemy fought the battle happened, but Judah was not invited.
Yeah. Right. So go ahead.
Well, so we've got. I was mentioning to you, we've got 3 nations represented here, and who they are, I think, is important.
Right.
From a historical background, we've got Ammon, the Ammonites, Moabites, and Mount Seir, which is the sort of like it's another name for Edom.
Right.
Okay. So who these people were? Edom was
which is where. To the east side of the Dead Sea.
To the east side of the Dead Sea and the Jordan River.
Right.
So Edom was the family of Esau, Jacob's twin brother. Okay, so Edom,
so he's the one that gave up his birthright for a bowl of stew.
Yep.
Right.
Edom. The word Edom means red,
and
so he was covered with red, and so it was sort of a nickname for him. So we've already got Israel and Edom, who were cousins. Right, so this is a family battle going on.
Right, but a stolen birthright, or not stolen, depending.
Yeah, but it's just, we're far enough down, hundreds of years, but they're still related. Right? These aren't Canaanites. These are cousins. Ammon and Moab were the sons of Lot and his daughters. Lot, of course, the nephew of Abraham.
Right, back, all the way back to Abraham.
So we're still talking
and
about
wife turns into salt.
Family,
right?
Yeah. We're still talking about family here. This is not, the enemies of God and Canaan and all this stuff against Israel. This is Israel and family. This is a family battle in a sense, right? So Judah's not invited, but when they go up to the top
they're there, right? They're expecting
there
to be in war.
Yep. They get ready. They send out their scouts the next morning to see just how bad this is going to be.
Yeah, because they should have lost
easily.
Yeah.
And what do they see when they get to the top of the hill?
Yeah, 500,000 dead soldiers.
Dead people.
Right.
Yep.
Right.
That's it.
So, do they turn around and leave? No. Right. Yeah, they took 3 days to collect all the plunder.
How cool is that?
Yeah.
How cool is that? 3 days to the word Berakah there means blessing, so they call it the family, or they call it the Valley of Blessing.
Yeah. Which it really is, right? They didn't lose any men in battle.
God fought for them. We don't know exactly what happened, but somehow the enemy just turned on itself, and they killed themselves.
Right.
Very similar to, possibly similar to what we were talking about in Judges, when Gideon had 300 men against 186,000 Midianites, or 180,000 or whatever it was, and the Midianites turned on themselves and killed themselves.
Yeah. Interestingly enough, like we talked, both happened at night.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe it was part of, we're not sure who we're fighting. Maybe it was part of mob mentality.
Yep.
Like
no idea.
Divine influence in there too, definitely.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So they worshipped, and then at the end of chapter 20, we just sort of Jehoshaphat, that's all we know. Except the last three verses.
Right.
We get all the way down to the rest of his deeds are recorded, blah blah blah. Oh yeah, let me tell you one more thing that he did.
And by the way, he made another alliance. Yeah.
Sort of a weird ending.
Yeah. So he made another alliance to build ships, I think it was.
With the king of Israel.
Right. Which wasn't against the law, but wasn't a good idea. And this time God basically said, nope.
Yeah. Yep. His son Jehoram, the firstborn, was evil. He did not follow Jehoshaphat's path. He had wanted nothing to do with God. Okay,
right.
So we've got a really, really bad king now in Judah as well as in Israel. So the entire nation is really In fact, it says that he did it. He followed chapter 21, verse 6. He followed in the footsteps of the kings of Israel. Just as Ahab's dynasty had done, because he married Ahab's daughter. Now, last week we were talking about there was this alliance between Jehoshaphat and Ahab, where there was a marriage alliance.
Right, and this was it.
This was it.
His son.
Yeah, Jehoshaphat's son and Ahab's daughter.
Yeah, but it is important to note that that's Jezebel's daughter.
Yes.
Right.
And there is very much a
which is kind of hard to make
going on here.
Yeah.
Because this daughter will show up for multiple generations, as a evil influence,
right. Right. So I want to jump into some details, but I don't want to, right?
Yeah.
Because then you just get dragged down. But you can certainly read for him. I mean, nothing good happens here.
Yeah, I think it is worth pointing out though that even though Jehoram was a wicked king, even in Judah. Verse 21:7 says that the Lord was unwilling to destroy David's dynasty because of that unconditional promise, the Davidic covenant. I mean, even Jehoram and his Jezebel mother-in-law and daughter can't cause God to forsake.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
It's really there's one verse in all of this mess that reminds us of God's faithfulness.
Yeah, so Jehoram dies at the end, a rather graphic death.
Yeah.
And then I think one of the last lines is, no one regretted his death.
At the end of chapter 21. So bad. He only reigned 8 years.
Right. And no one regretted his death.
They would not even make him a bonfire like they did with They didn't have any kind of mourning celebration.
It was a different kind of celebration.
Different celebration, yeah. He was buried in the city of David, but not in the royal tombs. He got
Yeah.
none of the accolades of being a king of Judah, even though he was still part of David's line.
Right.
And God wouldn't destroy
And
him.
yet we remember him.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. So he had one son that was left. The rest seemed to have died.
Well, he killed them. He killed them all off.
Oh, yeah,
I mean, this is like early Herod stuff going on.
Right. That's right. Well, he killed all of his brothers.
He killed off all of
Right.
his brothers, right?
Right.
Yeah. So
Yeah. So next we have a king that reigns for 1 year.
yeah.
Is all, and he followed his mother's evil advice, and his mother is
Jezebel's daughter.
right, who we talked about, and that's the piece that if you're reading too quick, you miss, right? And that's why that I think these videos can have some importance to it to point these types of things out.
Yep.
Right.
Yep. And the reason he died was because he was in the northern kingdom, making yet another alliance with the northern kingdom, and God had sent someone named Jehu to wipe out the northern royal family.
The
Ahab's family, right?
Right.
Well, wrong place, wrong time. You shouldn't have been there, and he got wiped out with the rest of them, even though he was a king
from
of
the
Judah.
south.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Be careful who you hang out with, I think, is an important principle
Yeah.
here. Yep.
But that allowed the mother, who's Jezebel's daughter, to say, "I'm queen."
Yep.
And then she decides, "I'm going to wipe out everyone else that could possibly have a line to the throne."
In Judah.
Yeah, in Judah.
Yep.
Was it a daughter, a sister of the former king? Figures out what's going to happen, grabs one of his sons,
Yep.
and hides him.
Who's only 1 or 2 years old.
Hides him for like 6 years.
Yep.
Right.
And we find out in chapters 23 and 24 that this little guy becomes, well, in chapter 24, chapter 24, this little guy becomes King Joash.
Right.
When he's 8 years old.
Yeah, king of a nation. So obviously he needs strong help, strong leadership. It can go good or bad, depending on who is giving him advice.
Yeah.
This happens to go very good for a long time.
Yeah.
And then ends bad.
So
And we're seeing a trend there.
there's nothing new under the sun.
Yeah.
And every so often we make connections to previous passages, right? Well, Joash did really, really well, and his story's not going to end
Quite yet.
Yeah, quite. I mean, and you can read in the Kings. There's a lot of stuff that goes on with Joash, but he did really well while the high priest Jehoiada was alive,
Right.
and he was the king's counselor. He really ran the country.
When he started the coup too, right? To get him into
to help
be
him,
king.
to be king, right? I mean, he was really a godly man who wanted to have the son of
rightful
David
heir.
back
Right.
on the throne, right?
Right.
And I mean, Josh is 8 years old. What does he know about running a country? He's
Right.
still in primary school,
Right.
So Jehoiada was really the one running the country and teaching Joash the law.
Right.
Teaching him what it meant to be a godly man.
Right.
And it was which remained until Jehoiada died.
Yeah.
And then Joash took the
Well, if you have somebody schooling and counseling you all through your life, and you lose that person, you're a little bit lost,
Yeah.
right? And do you continue on the ways that you were taught your whole life, or hey, there's a whole lot of other ways I can
whole
go.
world, right?
Yeah, I mean, we see this in 20-year-olds, right? When going off to school, or when they're off on their own for the first time.
Yep.
How are they going to choose? What are they going to do?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It reminds me of the book of Judges. While Joshua was alive, while the elders with Joshua were alive, Israel stayed straight.
Yeah.
But as soon as that generation died,
Yeah. Well, it's that whole generation who literally walked with God.
Yep.
Through the desert.
Yep.
Now the next generation is like, yeah, we heard the stories,
Yeah.
but
I just this past Christmas when I had the family Sarah and me, and then our kids, and in-laws, and Michaela was there, Lauren was there. We had our immediate family, and I reminded them that I'm a second generation Christian. My parents were first generation. They were the first ones saved out of their respective family. Well, maybe not first ones saved, but they're the first generation, basically.
Right.
I'm second. I grew up in church. I remember, hearing my dad talk about the stories of his previous life or whatever, before salvation. I barely remember my before salvation. I remember being saved very young.
Right.
My kids grew up in, Christian schools, Christian home.
Right.
Sarah's parents were saved, so they're second and third and sometimes even fourth generation believers. They've never had to deal with this coming out of the world, turning away from the world.
Right.
And it's the church dies usually by the third or fourth generation if there's not some kind of continued training and sort of like, not to get political, but they say that every couple of generations or every generation needs to have blood of freedom to remember its liberty. Right? It needs to have some kind of war, some kind of something to remember, the freedoms that we have. It's the same thing spiritually. Your kids grew up in the church, whatever. You grew up in the church. It's easy. It's just church.
Yeah.
It's what we do. It's who we are. We're Christians.
Right. But so easy to fall away.
Very easy.
And we see generations.
Yep.
That when it does fall away, it continues.
Yep. Right. That's why it's so important that somebody doesn't believe just because mom did or dad did or grandpa or grandma did, but they actually grab a hold of the faith for themselves.
Right. Stand on their own.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah,
and
great.
That's because when we don't,
right, this happens.
This is what we see spiritually in families and in churches.
Well, I think that's a perfect way to end. We didn't really have an ending when we started, so it's great that we got there.
That's why we walk the path. That's why we teach the path, perseverance in the godliness. We don't want to just stay as baby Christians, right?
Right.
So, obviously, we didn't hit a lot of the
details,
the super minute details here.
But it's in there. Take your time with it. Yeah.
And as you read through it, I'd love to hear, what it is that you see. We like hearing the comments and questions. Those little things that you pick up on, or questions. Why did that happen that way? Sometimes we hit it in the video, sometimes we don't. So if we didn't, go ahead and ask, and make sure that you're sharing these. Doing your reading. In a couple of weeks, we'll get a new card out, and we'll finish Chronicles, and we'll move on to the next part of our reading. So subscribe and like and share and follow and talk about these. Share these with other people. And we'll see you back here next week as we just keep on working through the book of 2